Recently I was contacted by a friend who I met in Nicaragua, and he asked if we could do a comparison between how we've got on in Paraguay and how things went for us back there in Nicaragua. When he first asked me to do this, I was kind of a bit torn because the two countries are probably two of my favourite countries in the world, or at least well up there, and it was a bit like talking about two of my favourite children. But after I thought about it, I reconsidered, because I think that it's probably a good exercise just to be able to talk about the differences, and also to provide the framework of how we gauge a country that we're thinking about relocating to. So for what it's worth, I compiled a list of 10 points that we think are really important, and of course it's entirely subjective. This is just our opinion. It was our experience. We lived in Nicaragua for several months. We almost purchased a property. We tried to buy a car there, and we moved around quite a bit, enough to really get a good feel for the country. Here are our 10 points that we look for in a country and how Nicaragua stacked up compared to Paraguay. Scenery, architecture, just the beauty of the place. Well, unfortunately, Paraguay isn't really in the race here. That's not to say that Paraguay isn't a lovely country, because of course it is, but when you talk about beautiful countries, Nicaragua, in my view, is absolutely a contender for top of the list. It's the most beautiful country. It's stunning Spanish colonial architecture. It's warm volcanic lakes, jungles, magnificent beaches, world-class surfing. It's one of the world's most beautiful countries. So I'm sorry, Paraguay, but in the criteria of most beautiful countries, Nicaragua absolutely smashes it. Well, cost of living here in Paraguay is comparatively cheap, not only to Nicaragua, but anywhere we've been. Everything from groceries to power and water, all of the essential things that you require in order to sustain your life. So clearly in this criteria, Paraguay dominates. And just to illustrate, when we were in Nicaragua, people would often not put on their air conditioners for fear of having a massive power bill. Here the power is so cheap, and also the associated things, not just power and groceries and things, but fees for car registration and all of those other things that tend to add up, really considerably cheaper here in Paraguay. Number 8, expat communities. You might think, well, it's odd to put that on the list. Your first community when you move to a country is the expat community. They're the community that you really lean on and rely on to let you know where things are, how to get things, where to go, where not to go, and a million other things. Not only that, the expat community in the country that you move to really shapes the way that the government deals with expats or immigrants. It's really important that a country that you move to ideally has a good, positive expat immigrant community that has a good relationship not only with the government there, but also with the people. In Nicaragua, it's a community largely of Canadians, Americans and others that live along the coast, San Juan del Sur, and along that coastal region. And then you have a large group of retirees. From our experience, it was mainly Americans, but many other nationalities, retired in places like Grenada and Leon and other places. Conversely, here in Paraguay, you have quite a multicultural expat community, predominantly of Germans, but also many others, Italians and Americans. But the difference between the two is that the expats here in Paraguay are far more established, even intergenerational. They're more like what we're looking to do, and that is to come be here permanently without any intention to return to the place from where we once lived. Whereas in Nicaragua, yes, there were people living there permanently, of course, but there wasn't that same feeling of permanence and longevity of the expat community. So in terms of our personal situation, Paraguay has given us a better chance to really knit in with the local expat community and to become more established. So for us, the expat community here in Paraguay has been better for our needs, the way that we've set ourselves up. Number 7, buying a house. This is a big one, obviously, and in both countries there's similar challenges. You have to make sure that your titles are secure, that everything's legit. You've got to go through a process, and in both countries they're not all that dissimilar. We went quite the way down the track of actually purchasing a small property in Nicaragua. So we had a fair bit of experience in that process, and it was okay. It was fairly straightforward, and we felt pretty confident about the security of the process. One of the advantages of Nicaragua is that, particularly in the town centres like Granada and Leon, the architecture there is just stunning, and you can buy a beautiful colonial Spanish house for, in our estimation, quite cheaply really, because the likes of it you wouldn't see in most parts of the world. So we love that architecture. So in that regard, Nicaragua had a lot going for it. The more modern architecture in both countries we found were not particularly inspiring. Perhaps the way that they build them could perhaps be improved. But all things considered, they were very similar. But this category of buying a house, when you think about buying a house, you really need to consider it's a massive investment. So you need to really think, how secure is my investment in this country? Now, this criteria actually links to another criteria later on in this video, but let me just say that if I'm buying a house in any country, I want to feel really confident about the country that I'm buying in. And I want to feel really confident about my ability to stay in that country. So for that reason, even though there's some things that we preferred about Nicaragua in terms of properties, we would much prefer to buy a house in Paraguay than what we would in Nicaragua. In terms of prices, they're both fairly similar as far as we could see. The real estate profession in Nicaragua was actually probably more established, we found, and more organised. So that is it for what it's worth. And I know that there would probably be people that would have a different view, but as I said at the start of the video, this is just our opinion. Buying a car. It's a really big one. When you move to a country, you really want to have a car. You don't want to be relying on the public transport. Yeah, you can use it, but I wouldn't be wanting to rely on it all the time. So when you get to a place like Paraguay, Nicaragua, buying a car is a real priority. Unfortunately, in Nicaragua, it's a real headache. And unless you've got all your residency situation in order, you really can't buy a car without going through a process which is not entirely up to scratch. It's a private agreement. So it's kind of uncomfortable, particularly when you're in a country where you're being pulled over quite often and the police can become quite finicky about such detail. So we tried to buy a car in Nicaragua, but in the end we gave up. There were just too many unknowns, and there were some hurdles and so forth. Conversely, in Paraguay, it's been not a problem. We bought a car, no worries, totally legally, it's in our name, it's all sorted. So buying a car, a really big thing, and you really don't appreciate it fully until you go to do it. Because it's one of those things I think we kind of took for granted. We thought, yeah, you just move to a country and somehow you can buy a car. But no, not necessarily. So by a clear margin, Paraguay takes this one out. And just while we're talking about cars, not only was it easier to buy a car here in Paraguay, but they were also much cheaper. So all things considered, there's no competition when it comes to buying a car. Shopping, the availability of things. Favourite food items or white goods, computers, electrical items, appliances, whatever you want, we found straight up Paraguay is vastly superior to Nicaragua. You can get just about anything you want here. Certainly the shopping here is markedly better than New Zealand in every category that I can think of. In Nicaragua, you could still get stuff, but more so in the city centre, and it was sometimes difficult to find, sometimes expensive, and the food across the board wasn't anywhere near as diverse. And I think part of the reason for the diversity of shopping and the availability of things is because we have a big German community, European community, and I think they bring in a kind of demand that really benefits the shopping experience. So Paraguay, by a long margin when it comes to shopping, availability, prices. Personal safety. When I talk about personal safety, I've cast a wide net. I'm talking about everything from the way that you feel in the community, walking down the street, to how you feel about the political situation, natural events, emergencies, tsunamis, volcanoes, and also where the country's actually situated geopolitically. Cut to the chase, in every category, we feel markedly safer here in Paraguay. We never had any problems in either country per se. We've never been robbed, mugged or accosted in either country. But in terms of the social situation, there were the odd time in Nicaragua where our spidey senses did tingle, and we did feel like we needed to take care and take some action to avoid certain situations. Here in Paraguay, it's never been an issue. It feels so safe here, day or night, 24/7. I've never had a drama. Not to say there aren't dramas, and we do hear of the odd thing in Asuncion. There is crime here, there's crime everywhere in the world, but in terms of the feeling that you get, and I'm a big believer that not everything is discernible in stats or graphs or government figures. I think your gut feeling tells you a lot about the places that you're at. Well, in Paraguay, I can say that this place feels incredibly safe wherever we've been. In terms of natural disasters, well, Nicaragua has volcanoes, tsunamis, so it's a far more dangerous country when it comes to things like that, if those sort of things are a concern to you. In terms of the geopolitical situation, well, Paraguay is one of the few countries I know that doesn't seem to have any enemies. It's kind of in the middle of nowhere, so to speak. It's called an island in the middle of land, and people are generally happy with Paraguay. It doesn't really seem to get involved in many issues that it shouldn't. So as a consequence, it feels safe here. Nicaragua, on the other hand, it's got a long-standing history of issues with some countries that you can do some research about. But, that's not such a big thing at the moment. But, in this crazy world, who knows? So all things considered, we feel considerably safer in Paraguay than what we did in Nicaragua. Not only safer in regards to Nicaragua, but we feel safer in Paraguay than what we did in New Zealand. In every criteria, Paraguay kicks it out of the park, both for Nicaragua and New Zealand. High on our list was just the feeling in the country about the future and the expectation from the people. And this might seem like an odd one to put on here, but I think that really the feeling of people in any country is usually a harbinger as to where that country's going. In terms of the feeling here in Paraguay, there is an incredible feeling of buoyancy here. In fact, it's kind of hard to believe that with how positive and how stress-free people are here in Paraguay, when you really consider what's going on in the many parts of the world. The housing industry is doing really well. There's a lot of building going on. The government's really talking up tourism. People are feeling just generally positive. There's no real issues with the government. People don't complain. There's not a widespread protest. Conversely, when we were in Nicaragua, let me just say this. I want to leave the door open to potentially go back to Nicaragua because I loved it so much. So I won't say too much on this video, and the fact that I've said that should give you some insight into the difference between Paraguay and Nicaragua. Let's just say that anyone that's speaking in the public domain needs to be careful with what they say. So for that reason, clearly, and for the reasons that I've previously stated, that being the feeling and sentiment from the general population, Paraguay has a far greater feeling of peace and buoyant expectation about the future. So Paraguay all the way. Really high on our list is our relationship with the government. Not only our relationship, but the relationship of people coming in, expats, immigrants, and the local community. Whether we like it or not, we've got a government wherever we go. So we had best get along well with them because, as you know, they're the power partner in a relationship. Here, we've had good relationships with all of the officials we've dealt with from the time we flew in. We've dealt with immigration, we've purchased the vehicle and dealt with officials in that process, and that's all gone really well. In Nicaragua, we went through the process of trying to buy a car, looking at properties, and dealing with the officials coming into the country and so forth. So we had experiences there also, and for the most part they were okay. But here in Paraguay, things do feel just more chilled, more positive, more friendly, more welcoming. And when we're talking about officials, of course we need to talk about police. Well, in both countries, you can look forward to having regular chit-chats with the police when you're driving. That's a pretty common feature anywhere in South America. And in both countries, they will tend to look for relatively minor things. But in our experience here in Paraguay, as long as you've got everything covered, you've got your fire extinguisher and it's got a good date on it, you've got two triangles that reflect, you've got your headlights that are on, there's probably not much else they'll look, but they usually won't find much. And if they do happen to find something, it's generally a pretty chilled conversation, and one way or another you can work it out, and it doesn't really cost you too much, if anything. And my experiences, and I've had a few here with the police, have been really fine. A bit tedious, but that's going to be a feature anywhere. In Nicaragua, it was the same deal, but again, I'm just talking subjectively, and from my feeling, my spidey senses when I was pulled over in Nicaragua were definitely tingling from time to time, and I felt like I was glad to be let go and on my way. So in my view, the general relationship and feeling that we have when dealing with officials, we much prefer here in Paraguay. It just feels safer, more chilled, more positive, more welcoming, and without any real dramas. The top priority on our list was pathway to residence, because that's what it's all about for us. We're not here temporary vacation or an extended vacation. We're here permanently. So obviously, if this criteria didn't stack up for us, well, then it's game over. In Nicaragua, there's several different categories which you have to apply under in order to become a permanent resident there. We know, because we went partially down that track, and we know others that have gone down that track, that it can be a lengthy, arduous process, and there can be hold-ups that can prevent you from doing simple things like opening a business. On the other hand, here in Paraguay, it was straightforward. As long as you had the right documents, you submitted them in the right way, you did the right things, it really goes well for you here. And we haven't really heard of anyone that, there's been people that have not had their paperwork in order, so that's caused some complications, but nothing that hasn't been able to be resolved. And the general feeling has been that as long as you've got your stuff in order, they're happy for you to be here. And it happens relatively quickly. We already have our scheduler and our residence. We're good for 2 years. We're very clear about the process. Feel confident based on everything we went through that we're going to be able to achieve that. So by a long shot, Paraguay is not only a clear winner between its comparison with Nicaragua, but as you probably know if you're watching other videos, Paraguay is on the top of the list anywhere in the world really for the ease of moving and establishing yourself as a resident and going through that process. So again, Paraguay by a long way. So that's my 10 criteria that I look at any country in terms of the viability of moving there. I hope that's helpful, and I would recommend that if you're looking at a country that you adopt some form of criteria, because it's easy to overlook certain steps. We did things like buying a car. It didn't really feature anywhere on our list of concerns or thoughts when we went to Nicaragua, but we actually found after a while it really started to really impact on us, because when you don't have a car, it's a real hassle. So whether it's that or anything else, I haven't listed in here things like healthcare and things because we didn't have enough experience in either country, but we heard good and bad things about healthcare in either country, and we've had a healthcare experience here in Paraguay and it was very positive. I heard about other people that had operations in Nicaragua and they found the right hospital and it went very well for them. So I don't really have a comment when it comes to healthcare in general, except that my general observation with healthcare is that people tend to get a little bit carried away, and they might have a negative experience at a hospital and then they sort of extrapolate that and claim that the healthcare is third world. Well, I've had some pretty ordinary experiences with healthcare in the countries where we once called home, so I don't think that it's fair to judge healthcare particularly on the basis of an experience here or there. And from what I see, whether it be Paraguay or Nicaragua, if you need good healthcare and you've got some resource, you can access it. So that's why I didn't include that criteria. But hey, I'm sure there's other things that maybe we should have put higher on the list or put on the list full stop. So if there are things that you think are worth considering or that we should have commented on or that you'd like us to comment on, please hit us up in the comments and be happy to answer any queries. I'm sure there's things out there that you might be interested in. Luckily, we still have friends in Nicaragua and they're going through the processes. They love it there, and so they should. As I said at the start of this video, this has been like talking about my two favourite children. In some ways my head is in Paraguay, my heart is in Nicaragua. I absolutely love Nicaragua with a absolute passion. And I was quite sad when we left, and I still think about it often. I think Nicaragua is somewhere that everyone should go and visit because it's one of the world's true treasures in many ways, and so few people really know just how beautiful it is. I hope that's been useful, and if I can add anything to the commentary or discussion, please hit me up. Okay, until next time, take care. Ciao.
I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute. I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning. And this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living.